Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Podcast, where we let your biology do the bedtime storytelling. Tonight, you're sitting at the edge of something tiny and ancient, a flavor most people avoid, a word that makes your tongue preemptively flinch, bitter. You're not alone. You, me, every squirrel and spider monkey from here to 12th century Persia, we've all recoiled from bitterness at some point. But here's the twist. That grimace may be hiding a nervous system lullaby. Imagine this. You're in your kitchen, barefoot on the cool tile, and there's just a dusty little bottle at the back of your cabinet. It smells faintly of bark, maybe regret. It's labeled digestive bitters in some faded font. You ignore it, understandable. But tonight we'll open it not to drink it, but to understand it. Because this humble, harsh taste may hold the secret to how your body says, shh. Of course, you probably won't survive this episode without rethinking salad greens forever. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first imaginary bite of radicchio. It's cold, sharp, leafy. Your tongue detects the bitterness instantly, thanks to the cluster of T2R receptors planted across your taste buds like tiny security guards. And here's the kicker. These bitter taste receptors are ancient, prehistoric even, designed to warn you, not woo you. Because back then, bitter often meant poison. But somewhere in the weird evolution of mammals and their very tired brains, something changed. Your taste buds still shout danger, but your nervous system, it starts to exhale. Modern science is still tiptoeing toward the why. The front end is simple. Bitterness triggers salivation, digestive enzyme release, and a whole backstage crew of parasympathetic nudges. You chew that endive and your stomach quietly revs its engine. Your small intestine prepares to scan and sort, but upstream, your vagus nerve perks up. And we'll get to that long, moody nerve soon. For now, linger with the taste, that flavor intensely astringent, slightly metallic, oddly floral. A signal that says, pay attention in the mouth, but somehow becomes relax, you're safe in the belly. Historians still argue whether early humans sought out bitterness or merely tolerated it out of desperation. Some theorize that bitter herbs were spiritual, reserved for rites of passage or grim winter remedies. Others suggest that bitter foods were survival leftovers, what you chewed when meat ran out and the roots got weird. Either way, bitterness got coded into ritual, and rituals calm us even if we pretend they don't. You might remember your grandmother, maybe she had one of those tonics in a glass bottle, smelling like a cross between licorice and despair. You gagged at the scent. She swore it helped with nerves. Jeez. You rolled your eyes, and yet, that moment lingers. Something about the scent stayed with you. Turns out, bitter compounds interact with receptors far beyond your tongue. They show up in the lungs, the GI tract, even in certain immune cells. Some researchers now believe these receptors play a role in regulating inflammation, subtly guiding how your body calms itself after stress. And when it comes to sleep, that quieting process matters. A 1980s sleep study from Sweden, not too famous, but gently intriguing, noticed that patients who consumed small amounts of gentian root before bed had slightly lower cortisol spikes overnight. The researchers called the data non-conclusive, but noted that participants reported feeling more soothed. Sometimes that's enough. Your tongue, strange as it sounds, may be the first domino in a cascade of rest. So here you are, lying back, listening to your imaginary bitter salad unfold. You imagine chewing each leaf slowly. The bitter compound scrapes softly against your tongue. Your brain flinches, then steadies. The signal travels downward. This isn't your usual chamomile and honey bedtime story. Bitterness isn't cuddly, but it's powerful. And like so many powerful things, it works best when it's quiet. Let's not forget the monks. Medieval apothecaries used bitter herbs, wormwood, yarrow, gentian, not just to treat indigestion, but to anchor the body in slowness. Picture them, hunched over ancient texts, sipping bitter broths in silence before sleep. Was it health or humility? Historians still argue. What we know is this: your mouth is smarter than you think. It doesn't just taste, it sends messages, maps, reminders to the rest of your body. And bitter messages, strangely enough, tend to end in calm. One more funny detail: astronauts lose taste sensitivity in space, and yet they often request bitter or spicy food. Why? Some suspect it grounds them, gives the nervous system something to grab onto in a zero-gravity blur. A little bitterness to remind you you're human. So tonight, as you relax into this story, let your tongue remember something ancient, something small and strange that starts with taste and ends with peace. Your tongue is weirdly organized, like a moody topographical map drawn by an overly dramatic cartographer. People used to say different parts of your tongue taste different things: sweet at the tip, bitter at the back, sour somewhere off to the side like an emotionally distant cousin. That's mostly a myth, but there's still something interesting about where you taste bitterness. It tends to bloom near the root of your tongue, right before your swallow reflex kicks in. Almost as if your body is giving you one last chance to reject whatever you're about to ingest. Are you sure you want to eat this tree bark? And yet, night after night, generation after generation, people have eaten the bitter things anyway. Because somewhere in the sleepy archives of evolution, your nervous system learned a clever trick. Use bitterness as both a warning and a regulator. It's like your brain said, okay, fine, we'll accept that wormwood tea isn't toxic, but we'll only calm down if you promise never to enjoy it too much. This nervous system loop taste to digestion to calm is part of what scientists call gustatory evolution. And for reasons still debated in sleepy research departments across the globe, bitter compounds play a peculiar role. Historians still argue whether early humans adapted to bitterness for survival or for ceremony. Some anthropologists believe that bitterness came with status. The old, wise, slightly cranky village herbalist was the one brave enough to down a mug of boiled ash bark. Others think it was just pure necessity. You learn to like what keeps you from dying. But let's zoom out from ancient swamp teas for a second and take a stroll through your nervous system. You've got two main modes: sympathetic, fight, flight, forget where you put your keys, and parasympathetic, rest, digest, and maybe finally remember where your keys are. Bitter foods help nudge the latter. And how? You guessed it, by sparking a slow, cautious chemical dance. When bitter molecules hit those T2R receptors on your tongue, your body doesn't just go yuck. It triggers a cascade. Saliva gets secreted, your stomach starts pre-digesting, your small intestine pulls in more blood flow, your vagus nerve gently clears its throat. It's like a backstage crew setting up for the quietest concert in the world. You might not feel anything right away, but on a cellular level, things are shifting. Cortisol starts to dip, your heart rate might slow, the orchestra of your digestion begins a low, slow hum. And the more often you consume bitterness in small, thoughtful doses, the more familiar this calming routine becomes. Take a moment now to imagine a bitter food you hate. Maybe Brussels sprouts, maybe kale, maybe something your well-meaning aunt once brought to a Thanksgiving dinner and called heritage stuffing. You chew it slowly in your mind. At first, your jaw tenses, but then something strange happens. Your body remembers the pattern. Bitterness doesn't feel like a threat anymore. It feels like a seed. There's a reason traditional cuisines across the globe end with something bitter. Italian amari, Chinese bitter melon, Ethiopian tej with a bitter herbal undertone. These aren't dessert flavors. These are closing flavors. Signals that the day is winding down, that digestion can do its thing, that alertness can step off stage. And in the background of all this, your nervous system is taking notes. Remember how people used to carry bitter herbs in little pouches for protection? Folk medicine wasn't always about the immune system. Sometimes it was about vibes. Calming, earthy, I've seen some stuff and I'm still here vibes. Even today, herbalists still argue over which bitter plants are calming versus stimulating. Dandelion, for instance, is often listed as both. The answer, probably dosage, or mood, or the phase of the moon. Who knows? The science of taste is still playing catch-up to the world's grandmothers. And here's a quirky one for your sleepy brain. The poison dart frog gets its toxins from the bitter insects it eats. Those same bitter compounds would taste revolting to you, but they also activate many of the same cellular defense systems that help regulate inflammation and stress. No, this isn't an excuse to lick frogs, just a reminder that bitterness has always had double meaning: danger in medicine, caution and calm. Your nervous system thrives on balance. And bitter foods? They play the role of humble moderator. Not flashy, not cozy, but quietly, stubbornly stabilizing. So the next time you eat something bitter and think, why am I doing this to myself? Remember, your body is whispering back because we like it when things slow down. You've met the tongue, you've tasted the warning. Now meet the long, twisty nerve that carries the message all the way down. The vagus nerve. It's not a glamorous nerve. You won't find people getting vagus tattoos or writing pop songs about it. But oh, how it runs the show. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in your body, stretching from your brainstem down into your chest, your lungs, your heart, your liver, your gut, all the places that go a bit haywire when you're anxious and start purring like a sleepy cat when you're calm. When bitter foods meet your mouth and your gut, the vagus takes note. It's like a conductor raising a baton, signaling the parasympathetic orchestra to begin its lullaby. And the vagus is picky. It likes rhythm, it likes breath, it loves a good meal, and most curiously, it seems to enjoy bitter. Researchers still aren't sure why the vagus nerve responds so positively to bitter stimulation. Some believe it's a protective mechanism. Bitterness indicates a challenge, so the vagus activates the calming system to brace the body. Others think it's simply a primitive feedback loop. Bitterness slows digestion, which signals the vagus to downshift all operations. Historians still argue whether ancient physicians knew about the vagus directly or just sensed its influence. The Greeks wrote vaguely poetic things about nerve channels to the stomach. The Chinese medical canon speaks of meridians that closely align with the vagus's path. Coincidence? Maybe, but oddly specific, no? Here's where it gets wonderfully weird. Your gut line, with its own kind of intelligence, often called the second brain, has bitter receptors too. Not for flavor, for feedback. These receptors, when triggered, communicate with the vagus, which in turn whispers to your brain, slow down, rest, digest, maybe sleep. Imagine this system working in real time. You take a bite of dandelion greens, your tongue complains, your stomach perks up, your intestines gently squeeze. The vagus nerve registers the activity and quietly sends a memo up the chain of command. All systems show signs of chilling out. And the best part? You don't feel it. Not consciously. This isn't a caffeine jolt. This is more like a warm blanket being tucked in by a polite ghost. In medieval Europe, monks often ended their evening meals with a bitter tincture. It wasn't about flavor. It was about the after feeling, a kind of deep, grounded stillness that came from letting the digestive process begin with dignity. Modern science has flirted with this idea in research labs filled with pittery dishes and slightly overworked grad students. Bitter agonists, that's what the researchers call them, have been shown to increase vagal tone in animal models. And vagal tone, as you may know, is the measure of how well your parasympathetic nervous system can kick in when needed. Like when you're trying to fall asleep, but your brain suddenly wants to replay that awkward thing you said in sixth grade. More vagal tone, just fewer reruns of sixth grade. And here's a quirky twist. The vagus nerve responds not just to bitter foods, but to chewing itself, especially slow chewing. That mechanical action sends signals of safety and slowness. When paired with bitterness, the message becomes stronger. So if you're imagining yourself chewing slowly through a handful of roasted chicory root right now, congrats, you're basically doing nervous system yoga. There's also a spiritual element that's hard to ignore. Indigenous healing traditions across cultures often place bitterness at the center of purification rituals. Not because it tastes good, but because it marked a shift. From wakefulness to reflection, from tension to release, from action to rest. In the Andes, shamans use bitter coca leaves ceremonially. not recreationally. In West Africa, bitter cola was passed around in moments of peacemaking. In parts of India, neem leaves famously, fabulously bitter, are chewed at New Year to reset the body. These aren't just culinary curiosities. They're quiet nervous system cues. And your vagus nerve, whining quietly through your thorax like some tired but loyal snake, listens to everyone. Let's do something a little silly. Place your hand on your chest, even if you're just lying in bed listening. Feel your breath. Imagine a ribbon unspooling from your neck down into your torso. That's your vagus, just hanging out, like, hey, I got this. Every time you taste bitter and breathe deep, your vagus smiles in its weird, invisible way. And here's the final whisper. Vagus nerve stimulation is now a legitimate medical therapy. Doctors use small pulses like tiny electronic lullabies to calm epilepsy, depression, even anxiety. But you've got bitter arugula. That's your vagus hack. So next time you think bitter foods are just punishment in salad form, remember, your nervous system has been waiting for that flavor all day. Let it do its quiet work. Let the vagus take the wheel. Your brain isn't the only one pulling all-nighters. Your gut, the glorious twisting metropolis of tubes and microbes, is quietly putting in overtime too. Now here's the sleepy twist. Bitter foods don't just talk to your nerves. They talk to your gut bacteria. And those bacteria, they talk right back. Imagine a microscopic dinner party going on inside you right now. There's the loudmouth lactobacillus, the mysterious bifidobacteria, the cool, aloof Akkermansia. They're all swirling around in the darkness, digesting fibers, excreting signals, and occasionally throwing a tiny rave when you eat something interesting. And bitter foods? Oh, they're the surprise guest. You see, bitter plant compounds, things like flavonoids, terpenes, and alkaloids are tough. They're not easily broken down. And many of them pass through your upper digestive tract untouched. It's only when they hit the colon, the microbial metropolis, that the real action starts. Historians still argue whether ancient healers understood the gut's role consciously or just intuitively. In traditional Chinese medicine, for example, bitter flavors were said to drain heat and dry dampness. That sounds esoteric until you realize those metaphors eerily map onto modern concepts like inflammation and microbial overgrowth. So what actually happens down there? Your gut bacteria start munching. Not all of them like bitterness, mind you, but certain strains love it. The bitter compounds act like selective invitations feeding beneficial bacteria that produce calming neurochemicals, while starving out the drama queens that trigger inflammation and bloating. Here's where it gets beautifully sci-fi. Some gut microbes produce GABA, a neurotransmitter that tells your brain to relax. Others help regulate serotonin, which isn't just a happy chemical, it also helps modulate sleep, digestion, and mood. And yes, bitter foods help cultivate these helpful little residents. Think of bitter foods as real estate developers for your gut. They don't just show up and party. They create an environment where the chill microbes can settle down, raise kids, and keep the neighborhood peaceful. Let's take artichokes, for example, especially the ones that haven't been drowned in cheese. They're packed with cynerin, a compound so bitter it makes water taste sweet afterward. Cynerin feeds gut bugs that support bile production and digestion. And good bile flow, that's your body's way of saying, let's clear out the junk and prepare for rest. Or consider bitter orange peel, used in traditional remedies from the Mediterranean to Morocco. It's been shown to influence both gut motility and bacterial populations, creating a gentler rhythm in your internal ecosystem. Even humble coffee, yes, bitter and beloved, isn't just for morning wake-ups. When sipped slowly and early enough in the day, it can feed bacteria that encourage melatonin production later. Your gut works on a delayed timeline, like a farmer sowing seeds for dreams. Now here's a quirky tidbit. Some gut microbes can actually taste. They have bitter taste receptors similar to the ones on your tongue. That's like your belly having a backup palate. These receptors help microbes decide how to behave. When they sense bitterness, some slow their growth. Others release chemical signals that promote calm or initiate repair. And this is where the vagus nerve re-enters the picture, because your gut and your brain are in constant conversation, using the vagus like a walkie-talkie. The messages go both ways, brain to gut, gut to brain, and bitterness sharpens the signal. Some researchers believe that gut bitterness may prime the brain for better sleep by increasing vagal tone and nudging melatonin pathways. Others argue it's all about microbial metabolites, tiny chemical postcards sent from your colon, saying things like, "All quiet down here, boss. You can rest now." Remember how kids hate bitter veggies and adults, sometimes, grow to love them? That shift isn't just taste, it's microbial. Your gut matures. The microbial population changes. You get better at digesting bitterness, and your body starts to want it. It's like your internal world starts craving grown-up peace. Less sugar rush, more herbaceous hush. Now picture this. You're winding down for bed. Maybe you've had a small cup of herbal bitters or nibbled on a piece of dark chocolate. Yes, the real kind. 85% cocoa and proudly unsweetened. Deep in your gut, microbes are clinking tiny glasses and getting cozy. They release calming signals. The vagus picks up the call. Your brain, at last, seeps into stillness. All because of one bite of something you almost spit out. Isn't it strange that the very foods we're told to avoid as kids are the ones that help us sleep as adults? That flavor aversion becomes nervous system wisdom? That bacteria creatures, without a single thought, can shape how well you drift into dreams? Bitterness, it turns out, is your body's favorite lullaby. You just have to let your gut do the singing. Let's slip into the 1600s for a moment, where powdered wigs were itchy, candles flickered against stone walls. In sleep? Sleep was strange. Back then, sleep wasn't one long stretch of unconscious bliss. It came in two acts. First sleep and second sleeps, separated by a mysterious wakeful window. And guess what folks often did during that in-between time? They sipped something bitter. Monks, apothecaries, and even ordinary households kept little bottles of herbal bitters at hand. Wormwood, gentian root, angelica, all steeped in alcohol, tucked on a shelf next to the chamber pot and a fraying Bible. These weren't just drinks, they were rituals, quiet pauses, soft resets between phases of rest. Historians still argue whether these night bitters were medicinal, symbolic, or just something to do while waiting for sleep to return. But what we know now is that many of those herbs, especially gentian, stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system and promote calm digestion. They don't knock you out. They nudge your body back towards stillness. Let's zoom in on gentian, one of the most infamous bitter herbs in European history. This root is so intensely bitter that herbalists measure other substances against it. A pinch of gentian can flavor an entire liter of liquid. And in tiny, sleepy doses, it's said to slow heart rate, ease anxiety, and promote a kind of warm bodily surrender. Of course, no one in the 17th century had a microscope or knew about neurotransmitters, but they felt the shift, that gentle fall from wakeful tension into sleep's deeper layer. And then there's wormwood, yes, the notorious herb in absinthe. In tiny amounts, wormwood has been used for centuries to help with sluggish digestion and nervous restlessness. Just don't overdo it. Historically, too much wormwood led to hallucinations and deeply questionable poetry. But in modest sips, bitter herbs like these were companions for the long nights. Here's a cozy image. Imagine a 1684 farmhouse. A mother sits by the hearth, her children asleep, the fire glowing low. She pours a tiny glass of herbal tonic, swirls it once, and sips. Not because she's ill, not because she's wild, but because her body knows it's time to return to sleep. That knowledge, that rhythm, it lived in the bones. Today, the modern world has flattened that wisdom into things like take melatonin or cut caffeine. Helpful advice, sure, but far less poetic than pouring a tincture at midnight and trusting the bitterness to guide you home. And those ancient recipes? Some are still around. Swedish bitters, Italian amari, Ethiopian gesho, even Coca-Cola Yes originally started as a bitter tonic for fatigue and nervous conditions. The early formulas used kola nut and bitter herbs, mixed with syrup and a splash of alcohol. Of course, the sugar took over, the branding exploded, and now we're left with a fizzy echo of a sleep remedy. But deep inside that origin story, a nod to bitter's old magic. Let's get a little fringe now. Some folk traditions believe bitterness could drive out bad spirits that disturb sleep. We'd call those stress hormones or racing thoughts today. But whether it's cortisol or a cranky goblin, the ritual was the same. Take something bitter, breathe deep, lie still. And here's a beautiful parallel from the East. In Ayurvedic practice, bitter herbs like neem and ashwagandha are cooling, grounding, and calming to vata, the airy, restless energy that spikes in times of overthinking or sleeplessness. These herbs aren't sedatives. They're nervous system moderators. They don't shout, "Go to sleep." They whisper, "You're safe now. Come back to earth." Isn't that what we're all looking for at 2 a.m.? So maybe it's time to reclaim the bitter bedtime ritual. Not as punishment, not as a cure, but as a tiny, deliberate act of softness. You could steep some dandelion root in hot water, or sip on a little digestive, not too sweet after dinner, or maybe nibble on a few cacao nibs, real and raw, before you brush your teeth. These acts tell your body, we're done with the day now, you can let go. And if someone raises an eyebrow at your bitter bedtime brew, just tell them, I'm listening to my 17th century gut. Because tucked into those antique routines behind the stone walls and flickering lanterns, there's a rhythm worth remembering. One where bitterness wasn't feared. It was welcomed, cherished, sipped like medicine. And somewhere between first sleep and second sleep, as your body floats in that timeless in-between, you might find your nervous system sighing with gratitude. Let's wander into the world of nerves now. The ones that buzz just under your skin, that coil around your spine like delicate vines, that flare when you're startled and soften when you exhale slowly. Your nervous system, in all its quiet brilliance, is built to do one main thing: keep you alive. But here's the part they don't emphasize enough. It's also built to help you rest, to heal, to notice when the danger has passed and slip into a state of ease. And bitterness? That strange, puckering taste you maybe dodged as a kid? It's a subtle language the nervous system understands deeply. Let's talk about the two main gears your nervous system toggles between: sympathetic and parasympathetic. You know, these fight or flight versus rest and digest. The sympathetic mode is the alert system. It's what wakes you up when your phone buzzes or you hear a weird noise at 3:17 a.m. Parasympathetic, on the other hand, is your slow mode, your exhale, your after-dinner quiet, the long pause before sleep. Here's what's quietly magical. Bitter foods tend to activate parasympathetic pathways, specifically through their action on something called the enteric nervous system, aka your second brain inside the gut. The moment bitter compounds land on your tongue, or even earlier, when you anticipate a bitter taste, they send signals to your brain and gut: slow down, digest, rebalance. Historians still argue whether ancient healers knew this system existed in detail, but many cultures intuitively crafted rituals to engage it: slow meals, intense herbal tonics, ceremonial sipping. Let's look at a curious one. In ancient Greece, before big decisions or transitions, people would chew on rue, a wildly bitter herb with a strong, almost citrusy taste. Rue was said to clear the head and settle the body. Scientists now know it likely influenced acetylcholine pathways and smoothed out stress responses. And here's where things get even cozier. Your taste receptors aren't just on your tongue. Nope, bitter taste receptors, known as TAS2Rs, are found in your lungs, heart, thyroid, and yes, your gut lining. So when you eat something bitter, you're not just changing the flavor in your mouth. You're sending a ripple of awareness through your entire internal system. It's like your body's own Morse code. Short bitter pulse equals, hey, calm down. Long bitter note, equals, we're safe, time to digest, time to sleep. Here's a quirky modern study. Some researchers put bitter compounds directly into the lungs of mice. Don't try this at home. The mice's airways opened up, their breathing slowed, and they displayed signs of parasympathetic activation. That's not taste, it's full-body messaging. And then there's the vagus nerve, our quiet hero again. It listens closely to those bitter notes. When you taste or even smell a bitter compound, the vagus can cue the heart to slow down, tell the intestines to move more gently, and nudge your brain towards sleepier wavelengths. And it's not just any bitter foods. It's the natural, slightly wild ones. Kale that hasn't been bred to be sweet. Endive with its assertive crunch. Grapefruit, arugula, chamomile. Each has its own bitterness tone, its own nervous system message. Here's a gentle challenge. Try chewing a slice of raw dandelion leaf. Not a lot, just enough to wake up that bitter edge on your tongue. Feel your shoulders drop. Feel your breathing deepen. That's not just food, that's nervous system poetry. Some traditions take this even further. In Japanese macrobiotics, meals are crafted with specific flavor balances. Bitterness is always included. It's seen as necessary to cool the nerves, to ground the body, especially before sleep. Even in the rainforest, indigenous Amazonian communities use bitter bark extracts in evening rituals, not as stimulants, but to honor the body's slowing. Modern life has scrubbed bitterness out of most diets. We've replaced it with sweetness and salt tastes that keep us alert, craving, always reaching for more. But bitterness makes you pause. It makes you feel. You might think that taste is just taste, but inside your cells, bitter molecules are triggering cascades, enzyme shifts, neurotransmitter releases, blood pressure drops. And all of this happens silently, gently, like a soft yawn traveling from your toes to your temples. Picture it. You've had a long, humming day. There's a glass of warm chamomile with a few drops of valerian or motherwort tincture. You taste the bitterness, subtle, rooty, oddly comforting, and your body exhales. No fanfare, no drama, just the nervous system slowly switching gears. So tonight, as your jaw loosens and your hands stop fidgeting, remember this. The taste you once thought was too much is in fact just enough. Bitterness isn't a threat. It's a lullaby in a secret tongue. By now, you're probably sensing a theme. Bitterness, far from being a taste to avoid, might actually be the secret language of calm. But how did we become so averse to it in the first place? Let's tiptoe into a bit of evolutionary science, dusted with cultural oddities and the occasional food conspiracy. Don't worry, no tinfoil required, just an open mind and maybe a tiny slice of radicchio. You see, your ancestors didn't eat bitterness for fun. They were wired, like all mammals, to treat bitter flavors with caution. Why? Because many naturally bitter substances in the wild are toxic. Alkaloids in nightshade plants, unripe fruits, mystery mushrooms. Bitterness in nature often meant proceed with care. And yet, humans, in their weird and wonderful way, learned to flirt with bitterness. We figured out how to extract medicine from it. We tamed it in teas, fermented it in tonics, wrapped it into rituals. Historians still argue whether our ancient fondness for bitter foods was driven by healing, spiritual symbolism, or sheer dietary necessity in lean seasons. But whatever the reason, bitterness became part of human identity. Enter the industrial era. Food got flashy, bitter greens got sidelined in favor of blander, sweeter vegetables. Processed sugar swept across the culinary world like a caffeinated toddler on roller skates. Bitterness was scrubbed from store shelves. Grape became grape-flavored. Lettuce became water in leaf form. And your poor taste buds? They got bored. But deep in your genome, buried like a sleepy scroll, is a family of genes called tastebuds, bitter taste receptors. You carry around about 25 of them. Some people have more. Super tasters can detect bitterness at 50 parts per billion. That's like tasting a whisper through a wall. And here's the curious bit. Those who detect bitterness more intensely also tend to have more sensitive nervous systems. They might experience stronger startle reflexes, more vivid dreams, or higher baseline anxiety. But when bitterness is reintroduced gently, these same people can benefit most from its calming effects. It's as if the system that panics most easily also holds the deepest capacity for peace. And it's not just in food. In herbal medicine, bitters are classified by effect. Cooling bitters like gentian and golden seal. Warming bitters like orange peel and cinnamon bark. Aromatic bitters like cardamom. Each one interacting with your nerves in subtle ways, coaxing rather than commanding them to settle. Here's a quirky example. In 19th century England, nervous women were sometimes prescribed tonifying elixirs, comically small bottles of bitters mixed with alcohol and herbs. One popular brand? Mother Bailey's Quiet Drops. Contained valerian root, a splash of brandy, and a healthy dose of rue. Did it work? No one conducted peer-reviewed studies, but Victorian diaries are full of sleepy gratitude for those drops. Fast forward to now, and most modern diets are almost entirely bitter-free. We chase sweetness for the dopamine. We favor salt for the crunch. Bitterness doesn't sell unless it's hidden inside a $9 oat milk latte with chic branding. But the nervous system remembers. Yours remembers. And here's the part that might surprise you. When you reintroduce bitterness, slowly tiny doses, no pressure, it doesn't just calm the nerves. It rewires your taste expectations. It resets your reward system. Studies that show that adding a touch of bitterness to evening meals through arugula, chicory, or even dark chocolate can gradually lower cortisol levels and shift sleep cycles toward deeper, more regenerative rest. It's like giving your nervous system a bedtime story it actually wants to hear. You've probably heard of the gut-brain axis. But did you know that some researchers now consider the tongue to be part of that loop? A bitter compound doesn't just sit on your taste buds. It tells your vagus nerve, your microbiome, your salivary enzymes, get ready for rest. It's not just digestion, it's a full-body downshift. And don't underestimate the power of ritual. When you pause at night, boil a kettle, steep a bitter tea, and sip it slowly, you're not just hydrating. You're sending thousands of micro-signals. This is the transition. This is the turning down. You're not forcing sleep. You're inviting it. So tonight, when your brain feels jangly and the ceiling starts offering unsolicited thoughts like, did I reply to that email in 2008? Consider this. Maybe you don't need a solution. Maybe you need a taste. Something earthy, something ancient, something that reminds your nervous system how to be soft again. Because somewhere between that first bitter leaf chewed by a curious ancestor and the sleepy tea you hold now, there's a lineage of rest you've inherited. Not from a pill, not from a productivity hack, but from flavor, from quiet, from trust. Let it in slowly. Let's meander now into a place where science meets slow food, where every bitter bite doesn't just calm your nerves, but speaks directly to your microbiome. Yes, that cozy little rainforest inside your gut. A teeming world of bacteria, fungi, and other critters too small to see, but too influential to ignore. You're not just feeding yourself when you eat, you're feeding them. And here's where it gets wild. Your gut bacteria also respond to bitterness. Let's get dreamy with it. Picture a lush, mossy forest, roots reaching into dark soil, dewy underbrush, everything alive but hushed. That's your digestive tract at peace. And bitterness? Bitterness is the raindrop that starts the hush. Most people think of the microbiome as reacting only to fiber or probiotics. But certain bitter compounds like flavonoids and alkaloids act like conversation starters for your gut bugs. Not all of them, of course, but the slow, friendly ones. The ones that don't want to rush digestion but savor it. Historians still argue whether traditional bitter tonics were designed specifically to feed these microbes, but the overlap is uncanny. Cultures across the globe created fermented bitters. Ethiopian tej, Russian kvass, Mexican tepache. They weren't just drinks, they were microbial banquets. And here's the catch. The more diverse your bitter intake, the more diverse your gut microbiome. And diversity, in this case, means resilience. You've probably heard about good and bad bacteria, but that's old school thinking. The truth is, your gut's like a sleepy village. It thrives on balance, slowness, and routine. Bitters, by nudging digestion and slowing absorption, create an environment where microbes can take their time. They flourish in the slow lane. Take artichoke leaf extract, for example. It's bitter, it's ancient, and it's been shown to increase levels of specific gut bacteria that regulate serotonin production. That's your mood, your sleep, even your pain perception. And then there's gentian root, the granddaddy of bitters, used in European folk medicine for centuries. When fermented, it feeds Bacteroidetes, a microbial group known for its calming anti-inflammatory effects. Some sleep specialists even suspect these bacteria influence melatonin release, not directly, but through slow shifts in your circadian rhythm, support crew. And you didn't hear this from me, but your gut bacteria also make neurotransmitters. serotonin, GABA, dopamine, like little chemical bartenders. When you feed them bitter compounds, you're not just promoting digestion, you're setting the mood lighting inside your entire internal universe. Here's something curious. In a small study, people who consumed a daily bitter herbal tincture, just a dropperful before dinner, saw reduced nighttime cortisol and improved gut regularity. Not exactly headline-grabbing science, but the results were cozy, quiet, human. Let's float back to the ancient world for a moment. In traditional Chinese medicine, bitter herbs like huanglian and huangqin were used to clear heat and calm the spirit. Translation? They cooled inflammation and soothed the nervous system through the gut. There was no word for microbiome, but the effect was known, felt, passed down. Same story in Ayurvedic medicine, where bitter plants like neem, turmeric, and fenugreek were used to balance pitta, the fiery constitution that flares up with stress and poor sleep. Again, bitter cools, bitter centers. And here's a weird modern tidbit. Certain gut bacteria can actually taste bitterness. They have taste receptors, like little mouths. They recognize bitter compounds and change their activity levels accordingly. In some cases, they even multiply in response, not because the food tastes good to them, but because bitterness signals a certain kind of environmental shift they like. They know on some strange chemical level that the body is entering a slower, more digestive, more restful state. That's right, your microbes want you to chill out. Bitterness in that sense becomes a microbial lullaby. A way to tell your gut that dinner is done, night is falling, and it's time to restore instead of react. You might not feel it after the first bite or the second, but with regular, gentle exposure like an evening tea ritual or a salad of bitter greens before bed, you might notice something strange happening. You dream more, you wake less, your belly feels quieter, your mornings a little softer. The microbiome doesn't demand attention. It doesn't scream, it whispers, and bitterness is its favorite frequency. So tonight, when you steep your tea or nibble that last bite of dark chocolate, remember that your body isn't the only one tuning in. Millions of tiny listeners are paying attention, preparing for their own silent night shift. Let the bitter notes sing low. Let the gut forest breathe, and let yourself drift, slowly, into the sleep that only a well-fed microbiome can deliver. You're lying there, half drowsy, maybe imagining your gut as a sleepy forest with millions of tiny bacteria curling up beneath ferny leaves. But let's pull the camera back a bit, up and out of the belly and into the body's larger conversation, the one that happens through the vagus nerve. Oh yes, that shimmering, wandering highway of calm. The vagus nerve is a marvel. It's the 10th cranial nerve, running from your brainstem all the way down to your gut, touching your heart, lungs, liver, and yes, even your spleen like a soft-spoken diplomat. Its whole job? To whisper, relax, exhale, digest, sleep. And guess what helps it do that? You already know the answer. Bitter compounds. We're not saying your vagus nerve is bitter obsessed, but let's just say it perks up when it hears the word gentian. The connection isn't always direct. You taste something bitter, say, a sliver of endive or a splash of unsweetened tonic, and your body kicks off a chain reaction. Salivary glands wake up. Stomach acid begins to bubble. But deeper still, your parasympathetic nervous system gets the signal. That's your rest and digest mode, and it's the vagus nerve's favorite playlist. Historians still argue whether the ancient Greek custom of starting meals with bitter herbs was purely gustatory, or if it came from a deeper, almost instinctive knowledge that calm digestion required more than just chewing. The vagus nerve, named from the Latin vagus for wandering, was known to Galen, a Roman physician in the 2nd century CE. He didn't call it a nerve exactly, he called it pneuma, breath, spirit. He believed the body's vital essence traveled along this path. And while modern neurology may raise a skeptical eyebrow, the poetic truth still holds. When you stimulate your vagus nerve gently through bitter taste, slow breath, or humming, yes, humming, you reduce inflammation, lower your heart rate, and shift into a state that's deeply ingrained, sleep-shaped. And bitterness, when introduced calmly in the evening, becomes part of that slow turning inward. Take Amerigentin, the bitter compound in gentian root. It's one of the most bitter substances known. Just a few parts per billion can trigger salivation. But downstream, it also promotes acetylcholine release, a neurotransmitter that supports vagal tone. That's science speak for more calm per breath. You know how some people get sleepy after eating dark leafy greens? That's not just post-meal sluggishness. That's the vagus nerve reacting to a cascade of signals: bitterness, fullness, comfort. It leans back in its tiny hammock and says, let's make everything soft now. Want a quirky fact? In some Japanese sleep clinics, therapists use a vagus nerve protocol that includes slow chewing of bitter daikon radish, followed by guided breathing. The idea? Taste and breath together engage both the top and bottom of the vagus nerve head and gut-like tugging two ends of a rope until it hums with harmony. It's gentle, it's weird, and apparently it works. And then there's the auricular branch of the vagus nerve, the little offshoot near your ear. Some alternative therapies use ear massage or bitter eardrops. Yes, that's a thing, to stimulate calm through this backdoor route. Whether that's placebo or neurobiology is still debated, but if you've ever rubbed your ears absent-mindedly and sighed, well, now you know why. It's not magic. It's wiring. And here's where it gets cozier. Vagus nerve stimulation doesn't always have to come from taste. It can be from warm tea, gentle humming, gargling, slow walking in low light. All of these practices send subtle ripples through the vagal network, telling your system to quiet down. But when you add a bitter element to the mix like a chamomile fennel tea or a sliver of dark chocolate that lingers on the tongue, it amplifies the effect. Like giving your vagus nerve a scented pillow and saying, shh, it's okay now. And perhaps that's the quiet secret of why bitterness helps you sleep. Not because it knocks you out, but because it tunes you in. Because it engages the oldest parts of your body, those pre-verbal, pre-digital systems that still respond to slow taste and warm breath like they did 1,000 years ago. So tonight, as the lights dim and the air shifts and your eyes begin to flutter closed, remember, your body's listening, not just to the silence, but to the signals. The ones in the back of your throat, the ones in your belly, the ones traveling like quiet bird song along the longest nerve in your body. Bitterness speaks to that part of you. And that part of you, it's ready to sleep. Let's wander somewhere older now, older than labs, older than medicine cabinets, into the quiet corners of the world where bitter flavors were never questioned, just accepted, even cherished. Because before pharmaceuticals and supplements, there were rituals. And before rituals, there were instincts. In nearly every traditional culture, bitterness was a nighttime companion. Take the Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer tribes on Earth. Their evening meals often include bitter tubers and wild greens pulled from sun-warmed soil. There's no fuss, no sugar, no cheese-stuffed anything. Just roots with a bite and leaves with a growl. Yet, sleep in Hadza communities is robust, synchronized with natural light, and rarely disrupted. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe it's because their nights begin with bitter signals the body still understands. In India, Ayurvedic healers long prescribed bitter tonics called kashayams for evening use, made from neem, turmeric, or black cumin. These weren't just medicinal. They were part of life's rhythm. You drank them not because you were sick, but because you were alive, and sleep was a daily voyage you had to prepare for. Historians still argue whether Ayurvedic texts intentionally link these bitter mixtures to sleep or simply to cooling and detoxing. But many Ayurvedic practitioners today will tell you plainly, bitter tastes settle the body before bed. Over in Italy, there's the digestivo, a bitter liqueur like Amaro, traditionally sipped slowly after dinner. It's not taken to party harder, but to close the meal gently. Some older Italians still describe it as telling the stomach good night. The herbs used, gentian, artichoke, rhubarb, wormwood, are straight from ancient pharmacopoeias, and they didn't make it into the glass by accident. And here's a fun little wrinkle. Bitter liqueurs like Amaro may be alcoholic, yes, but they're also packed with terpenes, aromatic compounds that interact with both the gut and the brain. Some studies suggest they mildly stimulate GABA receptors, the same ones targeted by anti-anxiety meds in natural sleep aids like valerian. In China, the sleepy side of bitterness takes shape in traditional herbal formulas like zizi qi teng a, pairing of gardenia fruit and fermented soybean. It's bitter, it's funky, it's been used for insomnia since the Han Dynasty. Western scientists now say gardenia contains genopin, a compound that modulates serotonin and calms the central nervous system. But the formula was used long before we had words like serotonin. Back then, they just said it cleared heat and quieted the heart. You see the theme? All over the world, people found bitter plants and used them, not to shock or energize, but to ease into sleep. And while the modern world has largely ditched bitter in favor of sweet, a few traditions hold on. In Mexico, some families still drink hoja santa tea before bed, a leaf with a peppery, almost root beer-like taste. In Ethiopia, gesho, a bitter shrub, was brewed in low doses for deep rest. In Japan, tochu tea, bitter bark tea, is sipped slowly for balance and blood pressure. Not one of these traditions came from a randomized trial or peer-reviewed paper. They came from watching, listening, repeating. Trial and error across centuries. And somewhere along the way, people learned what made the body feel safe at night. Bitterness doesn't demand sleep, it invites it. It says, "You've done enough today. Let the flavors turn darker now. Let the chemistry slow down. Let your body do what it's been doing for thousands of years." Even today, in some sleepy alpine towns, you'll find old-timers who end their night with a sip of artichoke bitters and a glance at the stars. Not because someone told them to, because it feels right, because it works. So maybe you try it. Maybe you let one small bitterness into your evening, not because you're supposed to, but because your body might recognize it, like a smell from childhood or a tune from a dream, a leaf, a root, a brew that bites back just a little. Let it be strange. Let it be ancient. Let it whisper to the parts of you that don't use words. Because somewhere in your bones and in your gut, and along the quiet stretch of your vagus nerve, your body still remembers. Now let's zoom in again, not into the past this time, but into the small space behind your ribs where your liver quietly does what it's always done. Detox, filter, balance. It's not glamorous. But oh, it's busy, especially at night. And bitter foods? They're like love letters to your liver. You don't notice it, but around 2 a.m., your liver enters its peak time according to traditional Chinese medicine. That's when it's supposedly flushing out toxins and adjusting your body's internal thermostat. Whether you believe in energetic meridians or not, the science does back up the fact that liver activity increases during early sleep phases. Enzymes rev up, cellular repair accelerates, and your blood gets a kind of midnight rinse. Now here's where bitter comes in again, not as a hammer, but as a whisper. Certain bitter compounds have been shown to upregulate phase 1 and do liver detox enzymes, like glutathione S transferase. Translation: your body becomes a little more efficient at breaking things down, tucking away waste products, and leaving your system cleaner for the next day's business. Chicory root, dandelion greens, arugula, all those sharp, bitter plants you push aside at lunch, they're exactly what your liver wants for its night shift. No offense to your multivitamin. Historians still argue whether the Roman use of wild chicory was medicinal or culinary, but Pliny the Elder wrote about it as both. He claimed it opens the liver and encourages calm sleep. Not bad for a guy who also believed turnips cured snake bites. Now here's a quirk you'll like. In Germany, there's a little-known concept called Leberpflege, which literally translates to liver care. It's not a medical diagnosis, it's more of a vibe. People who practice it avoid alcohol late at night, drink bitter herbal teas, and sometimes eat a few slices of radicchio after dinner. The logic? If your liver isn't stressed, your sleep won't be either. Is it scientific? Parts of it. Is it cozy? All of it. Remember this, your liver processes not just toxins, but hormones, including cortisol, the body's main stress chemical and melatonin's grumpy rival. If cortisol lingers too long, it keeps your system alert, on edge, scanning for problems that don't exist. But when you bring in bitter support, especially in the form of herbs like milk thistle or andrographis, you give your liver a quiet push to clear things out. Less cortisol, more ease. Less tension, more floaty exhalations. Here's a fun fact. Milk thistle's active compound, silymarin, has antioxidant and hepatoprotective effects, meaning it protects liver cells. And the taste? You guessed it, bitter, almost metallic, which might explain why it's rarely found in gummy vitamin form. Let's drift over to a fringe practice for a moment. Bitters foot soaks. In rural Italy, elderly folks used to soak their feet in a bitter herbal infusion made from wormwood and artichoke stems. Not for athlete's foot, for calm. The theory, bitter compounds absorbed through the soles could help the liver do its job. Science hasn't confirmed this, but there's something meditative about it. A ritual that says, I'm done digesting the world today. And maybe that's the deeper point. Your liver doesn't just process food. It processes life, emotions, stress, the mental clutter that builds up like invisible plaque. And if bitterness plays a small role in helping your liver sort through that stack, that's a worthy bedtime habit. Picture this. You sitting quietly with a small cup of dandelion tea. The flavor is assertive, sure, but it's also oddly grounding, like licking a rain-damp rock, like chewing on something old and stubborn. And as it slides down, your gut listens, your liver listens, your breath slows just slightly. You're not sedating yourself, you're signaling, saying, I'm not in danger, I'm not in motion, I'm ready to be still. There's a hidden intelligence in these bitter tastes. They're not here to please you. They're here to support the parts of you that work hardest when you're asleep. So while the world hums with glowing phones and late-night snacks, you've got a different plan. A darker plan. A flavor that turns your senses inward. And your liver, that unsung nighttime hero, nods in agreement. If it wasn't them, thank you, and it says, let's get to work. By now, you're probably catching on bitterness isn't just some culinary quirk or a dare on your tongue. It's a dialogue. And your body knows how to speak it, especially when the lights are low and the world quiets down. Let's follow that dialogue deeper into your vagus nerve, the long, winding communicator that connects your brain to your belly like an old telephone line with secrets on both ends. It's the star of your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest network that slowly walks you down the staircase into sleep. And guess what activates the vagus nerve like a sleepy charm? Bitterness. Not a shot of espresso-level bitterness, more like the slow, creeping kind that makes your face scrunch at first and then mellow into curiosity. Studies have shown that bitter compounds stimulate receptors in the gut that send calming signals up the vagus nerve to the brain. The result? Lower heart rate, slower breathing, and decreased sympathetic or fight-or-flight activity. So when you take in a bitter herb at night, you're not just helping your liver or teasing your taste buds. You're telling your nervous system, it's okay now, you're safe. Go ahead and stand down. Historians still argue whether ancient Greek physicians truly understood the vagus nerve's influence, but Hippocrates and Galen both emphasize the connection between digestion, emotions, and rest. They didn't call it gut-brain communication, but they sure lived like it mattered. Now for something slightly weirder. In the 19th century, European mystics claimed that bitter herbs like angelica root could not only induce visions, but also tune the nerves. In strange language, sure, but today we know angelica contains compounds that affect the same nerve channels targeted by modern anti-anxiety medications. Coincidence? Probably not. There's also a peculiar little ritual from rural Japan where elderly women in the Akita region used to chew on the dried peel of a bitter citrus called kuchinashi nut to freshen breath, but to prepare for sleep. They do it sitting on their mats facing a dark window, whispering a poem or two. No evidence-based studies there, just generations of people who noticed it worked. Back in your own body, here's what's happening. Your vagus nerve, encouraged by these bitter signals, helps release acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter that slows your heart rate and tells your lungs to breathe more deeply. You don't have to do anything, your body already knows. There's even a little-known breathing trick to enhance this effect. It's called resonant breathing, and it involves inhaling for 5 seconds, exhaling for 5, and repeating for just 5 minutes. The rhythm matched with bitter taste can create a compounding calm. It's like giving your nervous system a hug and a bedtime story all at once. And you know what's extra cozy? Some old French sleep remedies used to pair bitter herbs with lullaby rhythms. They'd stir in wormwood tinctures while singing gently, believing that the voice and the taste traveled together along invisible pathways. Modern researchers might scoff, but the results? Quiet children, dozing elders, calmer evenings. You can try it too, brew a little bitter tea, and hum softly while you sip. It doesn't matter what the song is, your vagus nerve isn't picky, it just likes attention. And if you're not a tea person, try bitter greens. Arugula, endive, radicchio. Chew slowly, feel the crunch, notice the way your mouth reacts. That first jolt of bitterness is like a reset button, snapping you out of the rush, pulling you into the moment. Bitterness requires presence. You can't rush through it like popcorn. It slows you down, puts you back in your body, and that's the whole game. Sleep isn't about escape. It's about surrender. Your vagus nerve is already halfway there, listening for signs, checking your pulse, watching your breath like a gentle librarian shushing chaos. So why not give it a little more help? A bitter leaf, a quiet song, a long exhale. Let your nervous system uncoil. Let your heart beat like it's in no hurry. Let your belly unclench its little fists. Because when the vagus nerve is calm, you are calm. And when you're calm, you can sleep. So now that your vagus nerve has loosened its tie and is reclining in a hammock somewhere behind your sternum, let's tiptoe further into the night, to the chemistry lab inside your brain, where molecules tiptoe through the dark like sleep dust fairies. You've heard of melatonin, of course, your internal lullaby hormone. It rises when the sun dips, nudging your body towards stillness. But what you may not know is that bitter compounds can help regulate the very rhythms that let melatonin shine. Let's start with a molecule you probably weren't planning to meet tonight, T2R, or taste receptor type 2. Sounds like something from a sci-fi novel, right? These are the receptors in your mouth and also in your gut, lungs, and even brain that detect bitterness. When activated, these receptors do more than just tell your face to wince. They modulate inflammation, regulate gut motility, and here's the dreamy bit can influence the timing of circadian rhythms. That's right, the same bitter receptors that make you grimace at kale are part of your sleep clock. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians used bitter blue lotus as a sedative because of its taste, its symbolism, or its alkaloids, but their sleep rituals often included bitter herbs, quiet breathing, and watching the Nile drift like a living lullaby. They might not have known about T2Rs, but they were definitely onto something. Let's lace in a fringe fact. Some researchers now believe bitter taste receptors in the gut may communicate directly with the pineal gland, the tiny pinecone-shaped part of your brain that produces melatonin. There's still debate about how direct that connection is, but early studies hint that gut-brain crosstalk, sparked by bitter input, may regulate the when and how much of your nightly melatonin surge. Now consider your gut bacteria, those quirky roommates who don't pay rent but do run the whole show. Some of them thrive on bitter fibers, and when they're happy, they produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which in turn help your brain settle into deep sleep phases. So yes, bitterness may feed the very microbes that polish your sleep cycles from behind the scenes. Back in medieval France, monks at Chartres Abbey crafted bitter digestives from wild herbs, not just to aid digestion, but to support evening clarity, a euphemism that scholars believe meant deep, undisturbed sleep. Their manuscripts describe a potion containing gentian root, fennel, and mugwort, stirred precisely 13 times clockwise. We don't know if the stirring helped, but the herbs definitely did. Even today, mugwort, Artemisia vulgaris, is used in fringe sleep practices around the world. Some say it sharpens dreams. Others say it lulls the body into a heavy stillness. The bitterness is pronounced like licking a dusty coin, but people swear by its ability to flip the melatonin switch. And here's something charmingly weird. In Sardinia, local shepherds used to carry bitter wild lettuce in their pouches. At night, they'd chew it slowly before sleep, claiming it tamed the stars in the mind. We now know wild lettuce contains lactucarium, a bitter compound with mild sedative effects. Turns out those shepherds were conducting biochemical experiments with their mouths long before journals and lab coats. There's even a niche field of study now, chrononutrition, how what you eat affects your circadian biology. And guess what keeps popping up? Bitter compounds. Not because they contain melatonin, but because they help the body get ready for melatonin. Think of it like this. Your sleep isn't a switch, it's as a procession. Melatonin is the final act. Bitters are the opening music. They tell your body, all right, let's begin lowering the lights. So when you bring bitter food or tea into your evening routine, you're not just tolerating a weird flavor. You're participating in a neurochemical choreography your body recognizes and appreciates. That endive salad, it's not punishment, it's prelude. That dandelion root tea, it's the cue for your inner chemistry team to start lowering cortisol, raising melatonin, balancing gut activity, and softening the boundary between waking and dreaming. So don't rush it. Let the bitterness bloom on your tongue, feel your shoulders drop just a little, and picture tiny molecular lanterns lighting the way towards sleep. Your receptors are listening, your microbes are stretching, your pineal gland is checking its watch, and your melatonin, it's just around the corner waiting for the music to start. You're almost there. You can feel it, can't you? That slow, syrupy sensation spreading through your limbs like warm ink and water. But before we drift off entirely, there's one last stop to make, a curious detour into the world of rituals. Because sleep, like any good story, loves a bit of ceremony, and bitter foods have long been at the center of these rituals, not just for health, but for meaning. Let's begin in South India, where Ayurvedic tradition places bitter tastes at the end of a meal, not as punishment, but as a closing gesture. Something like, okay, we fed the body, now let's begin soothing the mind. Many still end their dinners with a tiny spoonful of neem or fenugreek, bitter as an insult, but strangely grounding. The bitterness doesn't fight the meal, it completes it. And you too have rituals, even if they're quiet ones. Brushing your teeth with a sleepy stare, folding the blanket over just so, checking the door twice, even though you know it's locked. These little acts send signals, not just to your brain, but to your entire nervous system. We are safe, it's okay to let go now. Bitterness, when included here, becomes part of that dialogue. A subtle sensory cue in the grand sleep orchestra. Historians still argue whether medieval German night beers were truly meant for sleep or just a clever way to extend dinner. But records show many brews were infused with hops, wormwood, and valerian, each intensely bitter and deeply sedative. These weren't party drinks. They were lullabies in a tankard. Here's a fun fringe fact. In the Balkans, rural families once kept small pouches of dried bitter herbs by their beds of lavender, rue, and yarrow. They'd squeeze the pouch before sleep, release the aroma, and mumble a phrase that roughly translated to, "Let the nerves lie flat like river stones." And you know what? It worked. Because repetition, like bitterness, is a powerful communicator. Your body listens to patterns. It craves predictability. And bitter foods or scents introduced at the same time each night begin to act like temporal anchors. Little flags in your evening that say, now is when we begin the slide. Modern science backs this up. Regular exposure to bitter compounds at bedtime has been linked to improved parasympathetic tone, a measure of how well your body can enter and stay in calm states. It's like stretching your relaxation muscle. The more you do it, the better you get. You may be wondering, but what if I hate bitter things? Fair question. Here's the trick. You don't have to love them. You just have to let them in. Bitterness, unlike sweetness, demands your attention. It slows you down. It asks for negotiation. And in that moment of pause before you swallow, before you wince, something shifts. That pause is the ritual. In Guatemala, for example, some families still chew bitter cacao beans before sleep, not for pleasure, but to humble the mind. They say the bitterness silences the chatter. There's even a phrase, la amargura cala la boca. Bitterness quiets the mouth. Isn't that what you want too? To quiet the mouth, to hush the mind, to fold into your sheets like a letter being sealed. So here's a tiny suggestion for your own sleepy ceremony. Pick a bitter thing. It could be chamomile's sharper cousin, tansy, or maybe chicory. Or just a square of high cacao chocolate, the real kind, the kind that puckers your tongue. Take it slowly. Let the flavor open like a creaky door. Breathe through it. Listen to your heart shift tempo. Then repeat. Not tonight, not even tomorrow, but often enough that your body starts recognizing the cue, like a familiar lullaby, sour and sweet in all the right places. And here's the quiet truth. No one else needs to understand your ritual. It can be as strange as you like. Drink your bitter tea while staring at a houseplant. Whisper goodnight to your ceiling fan. Chew a sprig of parsley and watch the curtains move. The point isn't the logic, the point is the message. This is the part where I let the day go. So let it go with your bitter herb, with your silly breath, with your sleepy, wonderful human self. And now here we are. You've traveled through the bitter gardens of your body and brain, wandered the winding paths of ancient teas, medieval brews, strange bacteria, forgotten lullabies, and neurochemical side doors. Now, just before the final hush, let's turn inward and settle into the quiet aftermath of it all, the moment when everything's done and nothing needs to make sense anymore. Your nervous system, that vigilant guard dog, is curling up at your feet. You've fed it bitter herbs and warm breath. You've coaxed the cortisol dragon back into its cave. The world outside your room can keep spinning. Your internal universe is tilting towards sleep. Let's land this with one last image. Imagine your vagus nerve not as a bundle of fibers, but as a sleepy rope bridge swaying between heart and brain. Each bitter ritual, each mindful chew tightens its threads. Every time you return to that strange flavor, your body remembers, this is the path. That bridge becomes a bit sturdier, the crossing a little easier. You may not feel it immediately. Sleep is rarely theatrical. It prefers side doors and soft landings. But over time, as you weave bitterness into your evenings like a strange thread of moon-colored floss, your nervous system becomes more fluent in the language of calm. Historians still argue whether the Tlingit people of the Pacific Northwest used bitter bark teas for sleep or spirit visions. But what's undeniable is the ceremony. They didn't drink in haste. The bitterness was part of the point. It grounded them in their bodies before they crossed into the other realm, sleep or otherwise. In the same way, you now have tools tucked in your palm. They're not flashy, not sweet, not dramatic, but they're yours, a bitter taste, a patient breath, a dim screen in a quiet room. You've probably noticed it by now. Your breath slowing, your jaw unclenching, the tiny itches of alertness fading like stars at dawn. That's the magic. It sneaks in while you're being ordinary, while you're just listening, while you're sipping something sharp and wondering why your fingers feel warm. This is where it all comes together, not in a final explanation, but in your body's subtle agreement. Yes, now is the time to sleep. And remember that peculiar truth? Bitterness isn't the enemy of comfort. It's the doorman. It doesn't slam you into rest. It bows. It whispers. It opens the curtain and lets you walk in, half smiling. Now the wind down begins. Wind down 300 words. The lights are low now, your limbs heavy and kind. The taste of bitter things has long faded, but something quieter has taken its place. Something familiar, like a blanket you forgot you owned. Your thoughts move like slow clouds, itue and pale and unhurried. Nothing matters just now. Not the emails unopened or the messages unsent. Not the socks on the floor or the laundry still damp in the washer. Those things will wait. They always do. Tonight, you've done something sacred in its own soft way. You've remembered what your body always knew. That calm lives inside you, waiting to be stirred, not with force, but with ritual. You've listened to strange stories. Let molecules tiptoe through your head. Let history whisper strange lullabies from dusty corners of the globe. And it's all worked its way in, gently, like cool water into dry earth. The bitter taste was just the beginning. Now comes the part where nothing is required. No answers, no action, just you here and this hush, curling around you like steam rising off a cup. So sink into it. Let go of holding on. Let your face soften, your belly rise, your tongue rest on the roof of your mouth. You don't need to think. You only need to drift, because sleep is coming. Not in a rush, not in a roar, but the way fog creeps over the sea, steady, quiet, certain. And you're already halfway there.